Sorry.
Senator, what's your optimism, your level of optimism on an actual compromise bill coming out of this committee and making it through Congress?
I just told this group of business leaders in Southern Illinois, I think it's a long shot. Unless the members of Congress take to heart what Standard & Poor's did to us last weekend. If we realize that our failure to come up with a bipartisan agreement is going to continue to hurt this economy, kill off jobs, hurt businesses, and really diminish the savings of people, then we're going to continue with this deadline. But if we realize that this damage needs to be controlled and we need to work together, then I have a much more optimistic view.
What would you say to the Americans who've lost confidence in Congress and, you know, government as a whole, given there was that waiting till the very last minute, and then there were consequences after that?
This is a relatively new phenomenon. We're going to close down the government, close down the economy, or else. And I just don't think that it is responsible for people to do that, play those political games to the last minute. Because the victims, if we fail on extending the debt ceiling, we're not House members and senators. The victims were businesses and individuals all across America who would see interest rates go up and the credit rating of the United States go down. So I think we've got to stop these doomsday high noon scenarios, hostage taking, and stop that approach. I don't think it's helpful for America.
Senator Carterville, Congress shouldn't be in recess right now. It should be back in and working on it. Do you agree?
Well, I don't know if canceling this recess would solve the problem. We have a lot of work to be done before we come up with a scenario that can be acceptable for political parties. But I know from the conversation I had with Senator Murray this morning that work is underway. So it might be good to take a week or two breather here and then come back and take this really seriously.
Can you give us a little more clarity on the FAA reauthorization and how some of the subsidies to the essential air service should be doled out, because there's discussion about what airports should get it and what should not?
There are 3 airports in Illinois that receive essential air subsidies: Marion, Quincy, and Decatur. The amount of subsidy per passenger in Marion and Quincy is relatively small. The amount in Decatur substantially larger. My guess is that we will go through a reform of this program and perhaps phase it out over a period of time. But I think the reality is this is a subsidy. At a time when we are dealing with budget deficits, we've got to look at each and every one of these to justify them. And it is obviously easier to justify Marion's subsidy than Decatur's at this moment.
So during your radio interview in Springfield, you were referring to Decatur?
Yes. And you see, Decatur is $679 per passenger. Everyone who sits down in the seat. The numbers down here in Marion and Quincy, I think, are around the range of $150. So it's 1/4, less than a fourth. But still, you know, there are going to be critics who say get rid of all of them. I think phasing them down makes sense. The worst, biggest subsidies, $3,500 per passenger. We can't do that.
Compromise is a bad word in Washington.
Not with me. And I'll tell you what, those politicians who say, you know, I am rock solid in my values, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to compromise, they're the problem. We have to be willing to sit down at the table and reach agreement. And that means putting in that agreement things you hate. I just did that. The debt ceiling extension has provisions which I totally disagree with. And the city folks on the other side say the same thing. That is the nature of compromise. It's the nature of life. And I hope that the people who are so darn sure that they're right every minute of every day will reflect and maybe take a little bit of humility into their lives.
There's been some criticism of the president that he's not really leading because he hasn't really put forth his own plan when it comes to cutting the deficit. What do you have to say about that?
The president publicly endorsed the so-called Game of Six plan, which was very specific in terms of how to do this. I know from conversations I've been in where he has spoken to leaders in Congress, Democrats and Republicans. He's made it clear he wants to go towards long-term deficit reduction of at least $4 trillion. In terms of spending cuts and other changes, he has sat down with Speaker Boehner and others and spelled it out in detail. Now, they didn't put it out in the press release because they were negotiating. But the president has been engaged in this, but he can't do it alone. Congress has to join him, and the Democrats and Republicans to get there.
What were the behind-the-scenes feelings in the halls of Congress when you guys left the very public floor and went back into your offices, rooms, throughout this process when it was failure after failure after failure to come to a compromise and the time was running short?
We were very consistent because to default on our debt for the first time in our history would have been grossly irresponsible and damaged a lot of innocent workers and families and businesses. And seriously, a lot of us sat down and said, if it reaches this point, the Tea Party insists on defaulting on our debt ceiling, what can we do? And we started reading the Constitution, the powers of the president to go through to say, I'm not going to let this happen to America. And that was part of the backseat discussion. Luckily, it didn't reach that point. Okay? Thanks, everybody.